And so this is really nice to talk to students who, over 25 years ago, I was in your same position. Um, so after graduating high school, just to give a synopsis, I already knew I wanted to go into medicine from an early age. And so then I went locally here to Washington University here in St. Louis for 4 years and graduated with a degree in chemistry. And then I went to Dallas and moved to Dallas for medical school for 4 years. And after 4 years, I knew I was going to come back to St. Louis with just family, and my wife and I, our family was here. So, and during the course of medical school, when I entered medical school, I thought I was going to go into family practice. I had been influenced by my own family practitioner growing up, but that changed course during the course of medical school, just with different experiences. And I decided to go into what's called internal medicine, which is just taking care of really adults, 18 and older, and dealing with a lot of, well, it's internal, every organ system you can think of in the body. Um, and, so you have internal medicine doctors who work in offices, and then you have internal medicine doctors who work in the hospital. And during the course of medical school, I sort of I liked the hospital setting. So when I came back to St. Louis, I had to do a training program. You have to do training. So even though you graduate medical school and technically you have a medical degree, you're really not ready to be on your own yet. You need at least 3 years of training. You can almost think of it as sort of maybe back in the old days, an apprenticeship, they might have called it. But you get formal residency training, is what they call it. You're an intern for your first year, and then after, in which you're sort of doing all the data collection. You're seeing all the patients. You're doing a lot of work, a lot of paperwork, a lot of what they call scut work, but you're really learning at the same time. And you have like a what they call a senior resident above you who sort of, if you have questions, he or she is kind of your fallback. You can go to them for questions and help. And then on top of the senior, you have an attending, and he or she is in charge, also, in charge and responsible for teaching you and training you. So I did that for 3 years at St. Mary's Residency Hospital here in St. Louis. And I decided to stay on at that hospital after I graduated, and I worked as what's called a hospitalist, which is an internal medicine doctor who works only in the hospital, taking care of all patients who were admitted through the emergency room onto the medical floors. And I did that for several years. And basically, we were taking care of a lot of doctors' patients in the office who they couldn't come into the hospital. They didn't have enough time to see patients in the office and come to the hospital. So they would ask doctors like me and my colleagues to help take care of their patients with a wide variety of issues. And after about 5 years, they started a night program where I was basically sort of doing the same thing, except now I was just working at night. And so at night, I would admit patients through the emergency room onto the floors and begin their workups, try to figure out what's going on. And then in the morning, my day team of my group of other doctors would come, and they would take over, and I'd be telling them about the patients I admitted overnight so they could take over care. And I've been doing that for 8 years. And about a year and a half ago, I left St. Mary's and went to St. Louis University, where I'm basically doing the same thing, working at night. And in both settings, I sometimes work with the residents who are there at night, helping them with patient care. And some of my other responsibilities, in addition to taking care of new patients coming in through the emergency room. So, if the emergency room thinks you're sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, they'll call me. You might have pneumonia, you might have some heart problems, you might have a liver issue or kidney failure, stroke, you name it. There's a lot of things. They'll ask me to take care of them, work them up, figure out what else is going on. And then at the same time, I'm taking care of all the patients that are already on the floors. So we might have like 60 patients on the floors, and anything might happen during the night, they'll call me. It might be their blood pressure's really high. Maybe their breathing's getting worse. Or maybe they just need something to help them sleep. It could be something as simple as that. So there's a wide variety. And then we, of course, unfortunately have to sometimes take care of emergencies. So if someone's heart stops or they go into cardiac arrest or their breathing gets really bad and it looks like they might need to be on a ventilator, we will I will attend to that as well as a team of nurses and residents, and we'll sort of take care of those patients and resuscitate them, do CPR, all those things that are pretty aggressive measures, and hope to get them to the intensive care unit, hope to turn things around. Um, so, and that's kind of a synopsis of where I'm at now. So I've been out of medical, I finished medical school in 2004. So I've been out, this is now 17, 18 years post graduation. So medicine's changed a lot. And, I even look back to see what's it like trying to apply to medical school now compared to when I did. And it's the statistics, it's more difficult. It's more difficult than when I got in. Um, so I was looking up, I think, a couple of days ago, and the percent chance if you apply to medical school is about 41, 42%, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was a little bit closer to 50% when I applied. So we can go through some of the aspects of that process, but we'll take it from there. That's kind of my story. So.
Yeah, so if you is it your junior year you take the MCAT to get into med school?
Yes, correct. So, once you get into college, your SAT, your ACT becomes irrelevant. You're in college now, and so now, if you know you want to go into medical school and you want to apply, you of course they look at really sort of three things, three categories, I'd say. One is your GPA, you know, uh, your overall GPA, your GPA within your major. And it's really important to state that you should major in whatever you're actually interested in. You really, really should see what you're interested in and major in that. Don't major for something to make it look good for them, because it doesn't actually matter. Some people think that, well, I have to major in biology uh, for medical school. Well, not if you're not that interested in biology. Maybe you want to study English literature and you really love it, and you should do that. Some people might think that, boy, I need to do something really, really fancy that maybe isn't typically the norm. Maybe I should major in, like, 16th century French literature, you know, and they hate it. Don't do that, So whatever, you'll have to fulfill all the medical school requirements that are required anyways, regardless of your coursework, but do what you're interested in. And of course, you'll do better in your major. And if you're going into medicine, this might be your only chance to study other things to a certain extent too. So you should do it. Um, but yes, then your junior year approaches, and sort of like your junior year in high school, where you have to take an SAT or ACT. Yes, you have to take this thing called an MCAT. And I would say the MCAT is different than the SAT, ACT in terms of they're really not testing. It's, the SAT, especially, and the ACT, they're really, I never really liked those tests. They're not knowledge based. They sort of are, but they're really testing your test taking strategy abilities, Um, and, in terms of the MCAT, you just have to study really, really hard. The scoring has changed very differently, but it still tests things like, your chemistry, your biology, physics. They do have a verbal section, but these are things you have to take as part of your requirements coursework. So it's not going to be anything you haven't seen. Um, and I think they've added some other components that have changed, so psychology is on there and things. But and a lot of people take courses for like a whole semester course just to study for this test. And it can be equivalent to your GPA. It can make up for a GPA. It can, however you see it, but it's an important part that medical schools take into consideration. And then they look at your extracurriculars, um, and it's important to just, don't do like 10 or 11 things. Choose, again, be passionate about things you really want to do. And if it's just two or three things or one thing, that's fine. Just go all out in those one or two things, and because you care about those things. And so whether it's volunteering with some particular in a particular setting, Maybe it's being active in student government, whatever it is. Again, do be sincere. Be sincere in your paths of study. Be sincere in your paths of your extracurriculars, and that's going to be very important. They to the medical school committee, so yeah.
And then after you take the MCAT, because I'm a little confused on it, is after you hear back, and then do you start applying to like the med schools and everything?
Yeah, so the way you yes, so if I let me do a better job of this. So, basically your the requirements that are required, your course of study, the math requirements have changed. Some medical schools require, I don't know, a little bit more math than others. Back when I was in college, you had to take I believe at least you had to take 1 year of calculus. Changed overall. You take a semester of statistics, for instance. A few might require 1 semester of calculus, and that's it. You still have to take a couple of years of chemistry, you have to take a couple of years of biology, and you have to take physics, I believe. And you have to take a year's worth of English, like composition and stuff, which almost all colleges require, anyways. You typically take care of all of those requirements by the end of your junior year, perhaps by the end of your sophomore year. In the spring of your junior year, that's typically when you take the MCAT. You are allowed to take it more than once. It's not offered with the same frequency that the SAT is. Basically, if you want it, it takes a couple months to get your scores back. And if you want to take it in the summer after your junior year, you can. And then what you get your score back, and based on your score and your GPA, you're typically assigned a counselor, like a pre-med counselor in college. And actually, this is someone that if you know that you're going to medical school, it's someone you meet with usually once a year, anyways, even before your junior year. But after you get your MCAT, your GPA, and you kind of look at your package and you think, what tier of medical school should I apply to? You meet with your counselor. They kind of look over the list. They hash it out with you. And typically, I mean, you apply to 15 plus schools, maybe 20. Some people go even higher, 30. It's a slightly expensive process, though. But it's consolidated through, you send in your general application typically by the end of the summer, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, end of the summer. It's this online application process. I don't think it's changed really much. You select all the schools that you want to apply to, and then you wait back. And those schools will send you their applications. So let's say you pick 20 schools, and the vast majority of them almost all of them end up sending you their own version of application. You have to fill out those applications. And then you send those in. And then you hear back for interviews as the fall progresses. And then you line up your interviews, and you're pretty much done with all your interviews, by January, you know, and then you wait to hear back on acceptances, and you might get multiple acceptances, and they might say, we need to know by such and such date if you're gonna go with us, or if you're gonna choose someone else, because they only have so many spots. You might be put on a waiting list at a medical school that you really wanted to go to. And if you're on a waiting list, if especially if you didn't get into any other medical school, but you're put on a waiting list, then you wait it out. And then you hope that someone changes their mind to go somewhere else. And there have been people who've gone off the waiting list like the day before classes started. You don't really want that. Um, but the goal is let's get a couple acceptances, at least. And most people apply to their state schools. So like when I applied, I applied to all the Missouri schools. I applied to University of Missouri Columbia, and then I applied to the two ones in St. Louis, which are not state schools, but they're in the state of Missouri, SLU and WashU. And then it was a question of looking outside of Missouri and where I was comfortable going, and then I went on interviews, and it's a tiring process. And again, it's kind of expensive. You pay for your own flights. Sometimes the medical students there will house you. Um, and the interview process is, it's a long day. You fly back. You're doing this while you're doing classes. You're a senior, so by this point you have a little more flexibility, and you weigh all the ones that have given you acceptances. You look, financial aid packages play a role in determining that, and then you choose one. So I think the average, I was looking up the other day, the average number of medical schools that college students was 17, 17 on average. And remember, you're also applying, there are international medical graduates. That is, there are students from other countries who have completed their medical training, medical school, and in some cases, if you're from another country and you've done a residency training and you come to this country, you still have to redo your residency training in the United States. So you're they will apply as well. So foreign medical graduates and American graduates will apply. So the abundance of that has led to the decreased percentages that I was referring to. So for instance, to give you some exact numbers, there were 52,000 plus applicants last year, I think I saw, for roughly 21,000 spots overall between all the medical schools. So, um, so that process, by the spring of your senior year, early on, you know where you're going. You want to know where you're going, and medical school is 4 years. If you want to do research, let's say you really want to do research, you're interested in, let's say, cancer research. Some people will apply not to a medical school alone, but they'll apply to what's called an MD PhD program, where you do medical school, but your education is intertwined with a heavy dose of research. And so that rather than the traditional 4 years, you might be in this program for 7 to 8 years total. So that's a big time commitment. At least for the years that you're doing research, you do get a stipend, so you're paid. It's something. um, and so and then you go into residency training after that. But most of the people who do those programs are very much research oriented. They want to still practice medicine clinically, but they want to combine it in some way with having their own lab, doing studies, that type of thing. But it's a long process depending on how you go about it. Um, so, if that's your path, if you want to do research, one of the things you want to do in college is you want to have some research opportunities during the summer or during the course of the year, in a lab, um, and even working your way towards even getting a publication, getting your name on a publication. Uh, I was not inclined towards research. I knew I did not was not going to pursue that, so that wasn't as big a focus for me. But for others, I had one of my best friends, a roommate in college, and we stay in contact. He wanted to do research. He did a lot of research in college with his lab, and then he got into an MD PhD program. It took 8 years. So that by the time he finished, I was already done with my first year out of training. Then he pursued neurosurgery, which is a very long training. That was 7 to 8 years. So by the time my best friend finished, I had already been in clinical practice for 10, 11 years. I had already had to recertify in my own specialty. So but that's the path he took, very long path. And he was nearly 40 years old, and he was finally done being in sort of the student resident mode. Um, so a lot of factors to think about, as you go about this process. But you'll have counselors all along the way, you know.
And then just going back to kind of like your daily, like your job, like what's the craziest thing that's probably ever happened on like a night shift that you had to deal with?
Well, nights are different than daytime, so nights there's a different dynamic, because well, you're the only one there at night, but the patient load is the same number of patients. In the daytime, you have a few more people there. So, and the teams they each have their own team. So, I think an example, I'll give you a general scenario would be I think, yeah, actually walking into a situation at my previous hospital where I had 18 patients waiting to be seen. 18. And I had never encountered that number before. And just the just to receive the handoff, the information on who those 18 were, like their name, their room number, and like one line, took another hour. And during that 1 hour, I carry a pager, so I'd received like 20 pages. And so I was getting slightly dizzy with the prospects of how am I going. I knew I wasn't going to be able to see all of them, but I had to prioritize who needed to be seen first. And then in addition, we got 30 more patients during the course of the night. That was a very crazy night. Another crazy night would be if you get a patient that's very agitated, and then at the same time you've got an unstable patient over. So you have to learn to sort of delegate and buy time for yourself in order to. Sometimes it can be very hard to prioritize when everything seems very important and you can only do one thing at a time. So you have to, even now, after all these years of experience, there are moments where I just have to take a deep breath, tell myself not to worry, tell myself I can only do one thing at a time, and go about doing that. Um, and if someone becomes unstable, then they take over the priority, address that, and go back. But typically, yes, the volume. If I get so many admissions, if a patient gets agitated, and you're having to give them medicine to sedate them, and it's a recurring issue, and the nursing staff's getting kind of flustered, and at the same time you have, let's say, a patient that they're deteriorating, another patient. So sometimes I've had to just stay right outside the room, manage the patient that's deteriorating, handle things by phone that I can handle by phone, and then if I can stabilize the patient, run out to go see a patient that someone else that needs to be seen. So it can make your heart rate go up a little bit, but during the course of the night, I often find there are some downtimes where you have a chance to catch up. So typically, the first few hours of the night are sometimes the most hectic. Um, I start my shift at 7 p.m. and I find that 7 p.m. to midnight, that's where a bulk of the very busy activity occurs. Have a lull in the action to kind of catch up. Uh, and then you hope, but sometimes it can get kind of crazy towards the end. And that's where you're kind of on an empty tank at 5 or 6 a.m., trying to stay awake, and your mind isn't quite as sharp, and you're having to still deal with medical emergencies. Uh, but oftentimes it's a team effort. You're not by yourself. I have a lot of specialists available in the hospital if I need assistance or advice on a particular situation, so that helps. So
And then if any of you guys have any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat or you can unmute yourselves if you have any questions. And then while we're waiting on that, I'm going to ask, how did you know that you wanted to go into medicine? Was it just you just always wanted to, or did you?
well, yeah, it kind of developed. My uncle, who was a doctor, lived with us for a time, and I do remember as a little kid his little doctor bag, and that stuck in my head for some reason. That doctor bag, and when you're 4 or 5, if anyone says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" You just say the first thing that comes to your mind, and so doctor. That was. But of course, if you asked a 4 or 5 year old why, he wouldn't. I wouldn't know. So that the the why part developed over time as to why I wanted to be a doctor, and I would say I enjoyed speaking with older patients, uh, older family members, I should say, older people in our church. I found that I got along really well at an early age with older people. Um, and so, you know, even at a young age, 10, 11, 12, I could have a conversation, and I enjoyed hearing the stories that older people had. And then my family practitioner was sort of influential in terms of, um, I saw how he was going about his business with my family, and I asked him questions when I was a teenager. And everyone wants to go into medicine to help people, um, but the figuring out, well, how to help people. You want to help people, but how? Um, and I thought that probably the best thing in medicine, from what I could see, is that it was lacking a lot of the personal touch. I'd hear so many stories from so many people that they had a bad experience with their doctor, and it wasn't even at all because of the treatments. It was just the lack of communication. Um, and that happens in medicine. In healthcare, it's a very stressful field, and to some extent, nurses, doctors, at a certain point, you have so much to work to do, and in order to do it, you do have to reduce it to tasks, and yet you have to find that balance so that you understand that the people that you're taking care of are people. And it's a hard balance between, you don't have unlimited time. If you're a doctor or a nurse and you have X amount of time to see X amount of patients, you don't want, there's a way to, you might feel like you're rushed, but you don't want to give the impression that you're rushing to your patients. And so you can do simple things like sitting down and rather than standing up, um, and so I felt like I would be able to handle that part of medicine better, the personal aspect. I enjoyed the conversations, and that would help, in terms of being a doctor. Um, but you're always learning. I always make mistakes. There are days or shifts where I'm like, boy, I felt so rushed. I wish I had more time with this person. I wish I had more time with that person. And so you have to try to, find in healthcare today, particularly not in my generation so much, but the younger graduates that are coming out of residency training. Um, it's more complicated now. It's so complicated. It can seem almost overwhelming in medicine, because it's a so-called business, and there's a lot of different distractions in medicine away from the patient. And I think one is having to always remind themselves, okay, why did I go into medicine? You know, this person, this patient, remembering that they are a human being. Someone loves them, someone cares about them. They have so many stories. And reminding yourself of that constantly, even though the day may seem terribly hectic, so many distractions, is navigating through that path. That's one of the most challenging aspects of medicine, despite all our technological advances. Uh, I sometimes feel like 100 years ago, when medicine didn't have quite the technology, doctors had more time at the bedside, and their physical exam skills were even better. And because they didn't have technology and the kind of things that we have, life saving even, they did a lot of their job was consoling, comforting the patient, being at the bedside for a long period of time. And the patients and their families, I felt, in those times, those stories, they loved their doctors, and the nobility of that profession grew out of that. And it wasn't the technology that made the nobility of that; it was the person-to-person contact, uh, the caring nature of it, the selflessness. We have now so much technology, but I feel like sometimes we have so much technology, and it's kind of, today in medicine, our goal is how to carefully choose amongst all this array of technology, how to choose wisely what tests and stuff for our patients so as to not make things, more complicated, worse, because even it's like a Pandora's box. You've got this wonderful thing, but it comes with a lot of its own sort of drawbacks. And learning how to be a good steward of technology, particularly amongst our older population, and trying to balance their quality of life with costs and side effects and risks associated with things. That's a path in medicine that is, more and more people are recognizing that we do have limits on our technology. It isn't always good, and maybe we're sacrificing quality of life for quantity of life, and um, so that's an ongoing issue that we have in medicine now. So, and that comes down to just communication, very basic stuff. You know, some of the best doctors, they're maybe not the geniuses, but they are great communicators. They keep everyone in the loop. The family loves them because they just keep them posted, up to date, and they're not condescending. They explain things in a layman's terms, and it's a that's a sort of forging ahead in internal medicine. So internal medicine is sort of the you know it's your it's the one field where medical school, that's what you learn the first 2 years. First 2 years of medical school are very traditional, book oriented, learning the basics. Then your third year of medical school, you do these clinical rotations where you're actually in the hospital or in the clinic. And those first 2 years of book learning come alive mostly on internal medicine. You know, you don't learn about surgery until you're actually on a surgery rotation. Um, and, so you have all these different rotations, basically, internal medicine, family practice, OBGYN, labor and delivery, psychiatry, surgery, and pediatrics. Those are your big rotations that you do your third year. And then if you want to do specialties within those, if you want to do, neurology or cardiology, you have more options your fourth year of medical school. So, but internal medicine is kind of where it kind of comes alive, and that's where it came alive for me, where I was like, boy, all that stuff I was learning, like I was seeing it in front of me in this patient or this patient and this patient. And there's if you've been paying attention to healthcare, what we need now are more primary kind of doctors. That's a big area. So we need pediatricians, we need family practitioners, and we need internists, mostly in the outpatient setting. Outpatient. It's a you know it's a calling, though. Medicine is still a calling. It should be a calling, where you feel called to do something that's it's going to be require big sacrifice. The educational process takes longer than your peers, who by the time you're done with your medical training and in your first job, they may have been working for 10 years. And you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I had that feeling too. We all had that feeling. We're like, I'm 30 years old and I'm finally, you know, now able to pay off debt, or something like that, akin to that. So,
Well, awesome.
well,
Does anyone have any other questions?
I do.
yes, go ahead, Manisha.
Do you have any advice on like finding shadowing opportunities? Because I know it's really hard to do right now. I just want to know about ways to like expose myself more to the medical field.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Was reading the other day, and I'm not sure how valuable it would be, but I know that they used to have, with COVID, it's kind of reduced a lot of additional. So I was reading somewhere that in some places they give virtual shadowing experiences. Now, I'm not really sure. I don't think that's very valuable. I think the in-person to in-person is very important. You being in St. Charles, I would think that at least in the outpatient setting, if you found, any sort of internist, family practitioner, just to get exposed, and, contacted an office, says, hey, I'm a high school student. I'm really interested in medicine. Are there any valuable shadowing experiences, or could I shadow for a month, or a week or 2 weeks or however long? I would think in St. Charles County, maybe more so than St. Louis County, there might be more opportunities for outpatient shadowing. The hospital one, I'm not sure when that's going to lift, because it looked like it was going to lift a few months ago and then they kind of shut it down. So, but it's going to open up at some point again. But I would check with outpatient offices first. And then when COVID restrictions lift, which they will at some point, then then you have a whole wide array. Whether it's in being in an emergency room. And one thing to think about, as you in college, it's not unusual. that pre-med students do, and I don't know if any of you have heard this, a lot of emergency room physicians now depend on when they see patients. They used to, a long time ago, have to type their own notes on the electronic medical record. And every other doctor has to, I do. But in the emergency room, because of the number of patients they see, they have what are called scribes. And these are people who are typically pre-medical students, pre-med students, college, who will work 10, 20 hours a week scribing. They're pretty good at typing, and you have to interview. You get paid for this job. So you're getting paid, you get experience, getting exposed to all the medical language, the semantics that are used, and you get the shadowing experience as well, sort of all combined in one. For they didn't have those opportunities, did not exist 10 years ago. Now there are whole companies that employ um, and check it out. It might even be, if you might not have to just be in college. It could be even junior, senior in high school during the course of a summer. So for instance, the closest hospital to you all would probably be St. Joe's at St. Charles. Um, and they use scribes. I know they have to in their emergency room. And it's a question of, let's say, how would you go about that? You could either call the emergency room and ask someone, what's the name of the company and the contact information for the scribes that you all use, and then contact them. And maybe they'll say, well, we wait until people take college or are in college, but whatever college you go to, there's going to be a hospital close by affiliated with that university in all likelihood, and they're going to be in their emergency room using scribes. So, so that's probably the best experience I think a person can get, and you're getting paid a little bit. And not a little, I mean, it's pretty good money. Um, and But in the meantime, yeah, for shadowy experiences, yeah, outpatient offices I would think would have leeway a little bit more, and I think a lot of a lot of offices would be excited to have, because they don't have many people shadowing. Um, so yeah, sorry, long-winded answer. Sorry. But internal medicine, we talk a lot, so that's kind of in our nature.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions?
And please, just as a reminder, I was a Francis Howell North student 26, 27 years ago. So I know things have changed, but I just want to let you know I'm like one of you guys, okay? Just a little bit older.
And then someone asked, what advice can you give us so that we can make the best out of our high school journey and prepare us for what further education medicine will entail?
Hmm, okay, let me say that over again, Catherine. My brain's slow.
No, you're fine. So, what advice can you give us so that we can make the best out of our high school journey and prepare for what further education in medicine will entail?
Yeah, I think you have to keep an open mind. I think it's good to have a wide array of experiences. So, I would say one mistake people can make is early on thinking you've made a decision and fixating everything around that decision, but it's not yet based on enough experience. So, for instance, a person in high school, maybe they made this decision when they were 10 years old, 15, who knows, and they said, okay, when I grow up, I'm going to be a surgeon, and they fixated on that so much so that everything it didn't allow them to open up to other experiences in college, to think about, well, what if I didn't want to be a surgeon, or why do I want to be a surgeon, what is that based on. um, there are other paths in medicine, remember, other than being a physician. So you can still be in healthcare via, you can be what's called a physician assistant, which is a different path, a nurse practitioner, a nurse. You know, if you want to go be a physician, then you have other choices. What specialty, and that's a lot of it's based on who are you, your personality, who you are as a person plays a role in that. So it's very interesting. Internists, people who are internists are very cerebral minded. We take our we enjoy the complexity, the details. Sometimes we get lost in the details. You might even say we're a little OCD. Okay, um, people who go into neurosurgery, I mean, they're a type A personality, typically. You know, a lot of surgical specialties, very type A. Uh, for all medical school students, they are a little type A in general, okay? Psychiatry, though, very different field for a personality, right? I mean, maybe very introspective, reflective. So, but who you are as a person, you don't really, you think you know who you are, but you find out more about yourself as you go along this journey. So, in college, for instance, I would say you want to take as well-rounded, your universities are going to require you to take courses outside of your major, but really look at those courses. Be interested in the courses that maybe you didn't. Maybe you would say, "Oh, I only want to take science classes." That's not really good for you. You need to take some courses in the humanities, quality courses in the humanities, to to sort of develop yourself as a person. And we've kind of found there have been some studies that have looked at, that, for instance, some of what's wrong in medicine in a sense is we're so science focused, that again, that what is that science focus? It's science and math are supposed to be very exact type of fields, right? 2 plus 2 is 4. There's really no interpretation to that. So it's a very fixed, rigid type of study, and that comes with the course. But when you're talking about taking care of patients, there's a lot more than fixed, rigid equations. And for instance, there's the unknown. There's the unpredictability. There's the interpretation of the person you're taking care of, their facial expressions, their mannerisms. So they found, for instance, that people who majored in the humanities, like English, literature, or something, were much better at taking into account. They could read the person's facial expression. They understood that they were okay with the uncomfortable situation of not knowing the answer. Why is that? Because they said a lot of their studies dealt with, for instance, reading novels about human experiences and the struggles they went through, and somehow that translated into their sensitivity towards patients. And so now there has been debate about what should the medical school requirements be. Are we selecting the best people for being physicians based on our pre-medical school it's a very healthy debate. There needs to be some science, there's no doubt. You can't just have no science. But to what emphasis, But for going back to the original question, I think it's using your 4 years of college, or however many, to have a wide array of experiences, not just in the college in terms of the coursework, but the activities that you do outside of your extracurriculars, your work experiences. Let these experiences help draw in conclusions for you to reflect on yourself, and maybe you end up finding out that you shouldn't be going into medicine, and that's okay. You know, that could be maybe devastating for a person who thought they were going into medicine since they were a kid. To find out, oh my goodness. But it could also be like the most important life decision, because the last thing anyone wants to do is go into a field of study, work at a job, and find out that they hate it and that they can't turn back, or they feel that it's too late to turn back. And I would not want that on anyone, because that could be a life of misery if you keep making yourself. And I've heard people say that in medicine, like, well, it's too late for me to change my path now. I'm stuck in it. And you're like, oh my goodness, you're only in your late 20s, early 30s. That's 30 years in front of you, you know. That will lead to burnout very quickly. So you gotta love certain aspects. You can't love every part of medicine. There's hard parts of it, but you gotta love some part of it. And so you want to do the same in your coursework. You want to find things that are interesting, maybe take you out of your comfort zone, and experience. And your activities, you want to choose volunteer activities or play sports or whatever it is, extracurriculars that you do that you really care about. And then your work experiences, find work that sure pays, but will give you a different, perspective on things. And yeah, some of those experiences in a hospital or outpatient setting make you realize, will I be cut out for this? Will I like this? You know, um, So we had people. Once you get into medical school, 98% of the people graduate. Very few people at that point. I mean, maybe one or two will be like, you know what, this. They'll find out at the first year. They're like, this isn't for me, and then they'll stop and they'll pursue whatever other course. But the medical school, once you get into medical school, you're going to graduate. The medical school finds ways to graduate everyone. So it's best to find out these things earlier on. Again, another very long-winded answer. Did that make sense? I hope that didn't confuse anyone.
No, you're fine. That was a
Probably
really
said the same thing 5 times in different ways, but
Does anyone else have any other questions? I guess not.
that's okay. I mean, certainly, if you guys ever want another session with a specific topic or something else, or certainly, I'd be free to do that. And yeah, I enjoyed doing this, and I certainly can provide my email address. I can provide that so that if you guys have any questions that come up later on, or you just want to contact, uh, please feel free to email me and just put a subject heading on it. But I'll give you my email address right now if you'd like. Is that okay, Catherine?
Yeah, I can type it in the chat.
Oh, sure, sure. It is lowercase Peter dot Shawki, which is SHAWKI at health dot slu dot edu, and that's SLU. Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Sent that out to everyone. And then if you guys don't have any more questions, you're free to go. Thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. And yeah, I wish you all the best of luck in with that whatever time you have remaining at Francis Howell North, and you'll remember those teachers for the rest of your lives. I know I still do.
Mr. Dalton, especially Mr.
Well,
Dalton.
I will share with you before I go. Mrs. Donna Malcolmus, and I don't remember if probably Mrs. Mary Hennepin. I think retired before many of you started your high school.
Yeah.
He was in charge of the biology class, but they were the two most influential teachers that I had in high school. I was interested in science fair. I was very shy. They worked so long with me for my public speaking ability. They worked me so hard so that I felt comfortable talking at that time a very controversial topic, which was global warming that I was presenting about. That's how long ago I was at high school there in the early '90s, and we went on so many science fair trips. They got to know me really well. I got to know them. We had some fun times, and I considered them really good friends. And I stayed in contact, really good contact with them during college. Even after I got married, they couldn't make it to my wedding, but they sent gifts. They met my wife. And, we've stayed in touch here and there over the years, and they've seen my family grow up. And, now because of Catherine, I'm reconnecting again with Miss Malcolmus and meeting up with her next week. So these teachers, I tell you, they do a great job. And, it's if I didn't do medicine, it'd be teaching, and so, I just wanted to let you guys know that, but I enjoyed this very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I know I
Yeah.
learned a lot, and I think everyone else did. So
Okay. Well, you guys have a great rest of the evening.
thank you. You too.
All right. Take care, folks. Bye bye.
Bye.